Dodging and burning sounds like the kind of activity which may be undertaken by a backstreet car dealer, but its origins actually lay in hand printing in a darkroom. Imagine my desk lamp here is a photographic enlarger. You have a light source, your negative goes between the light source and a piece of photographic paper. You'd work out your exposure, press the timer, the light comes on, goes through the negative and exposes the paper. The enlarger switches off and you pop it through the chemicals and then you have a straight print. But when you look at it, you may think that area needs to be a bit brighter or a bit darker, and to adjust that you would dodge or burn. For example, if I wanted this corner of the image to be a little bit brighter, what I do in the second exposure, hit the timer, the enlarger comes on, and then I just put my hand into the light path like this and create a shadow in the corner of the paper, and wherever that shadow is, that would be a bit brighter. And you'd literally just kind of have to work it out, and you just keep your hand moving a bit like that as to how bright you want it. If it was an area in the middle of the picture, then you could make tools up. This one's one I made just now. It's a bit of cardboard literally just stuck onto the end of a biro insert, and then same thing really, you'd make an exposure and you could just hold your little tool in the way of the light and just kind of move it around a little bit, and where that little shadow is, that area of the print would be brighter. To make an area darker, you would burn it. So if I wanted to make our corner to be darker, I'd do the opposite. I would make the original exposure and then put my hand into the light path to shield the rest of the print and just have the highlight in that top corner that I wanted darker. To do the middle, you could make a hole with your hands and put your hands in the light path to shield the bits you wanted to keep the same, and where the light was going through it would be darker. That's called burning. Now, the dodge and burn tools in Photoshop look exactly the same as those two things I have just shown you, and they do the same jobs too. The dodge and burn tools live in the tool palette in the editing photo manipulation section here, and as you can see, the dodge tool looks exactly like my little homemade dodge tool here, and it does exactly the same job. When you click and hold the button down, you'll see out to the side you have a dodge tool and a burn tool, which looks just like my hand, and then there's another little additional tool in Photoshop called a sponge tool. You may have other options there as well, depending on which version of Photoshop you have. I'll talk about the sponge tool at the end. When you select a tool in Photoshop, notice this little area up here gives you options on things you can do with it. The first is in here in brush, where it says master diameter. I can make my brush, my burn tool or dodge tool, larger or smaller. The more pixels displaying in this little box here, the larger it is or the smaller it is. Beneath you have hardness. That is, will what I'm going to do have a hard defined edge or a more soft fadey edge which blends into the image? If you were working along the edge of, say, a building trying to darken or lighten it, you might want a harder edge so that it doesn't sort of overspill onto the rest of the image, whereas if it was something softer, more like a human being, you might want a softer defined brush. Photoshop has presets too in this area down here, and you can choose different presets of different brushes. For example, if I were to choose that preset there, as you can see, that's a very soft brush. There's no hardness in it, but it's not a very big one. These all come preloaded. There's a harder version, but you can also make your own. When you do make your own, you can save that if you wish. So let's just make up a brush, something like that, 241 pixels, 58%. I can click this little drop out where there are lots of different options that you can use, and I'm not going to go into every one because we'll be here forever. You can go and experiment with those for yourself. But if I want to make a brush preset, I click this and then it will save what I have just made into that area there, and as you can see, here it is with a little highlight round it. To remove it, you right click, you can either rename it or you can delete it. I'm going to get rid of it. You can also create a brush size and save it in this little box here. You can see there are no tool presets for this current tool, but if I wanted to save that brush, I could do it in there, say OK, and now it's appeared in here. So if it was a tool you thought you might use a lot, you can just go in here and then pick it up and it sets it in for you. Again, I'm not going to save that because I don't really need it. So there's our dodge tool, and here's our burn tool. And as you can see, I already have an image loaded up, ready to go, of a Greek fisherman. That's quite a pleasing image, there's nothing wrong with it, it's very nice indeed. But I would like to see his face a little bit brighter. Well, obviously we could use a dodge tool to brighten his face up. Let's go and get it. First thing to do is to choose the size of the tool that you need. Now I would say that that circular tool I've got there is probably a bit too small. Another way of choosing your tool size, by the way, apart from this palette here, is just to right click on the image and it brings up that same dialog box. And you can change your brush size and put it over the area you want to work on to see if it fits nicely. That's probably about right. How hard do I want it? I don't want it too hard, but I don't want it too soft. We're on 58, 50, about 60% I think. You can get rid of that just by clicking on the image, but then that does instigate a dodge, so you might have a blotch. I find the best way is to go up to this little blue bar along the top, just click there, and it gets rid of the box, but it maintains the brush. The next little box along the top is what area do you want to work on? Do you want to work on the mid-tones, or the shadows, or the highlights? Although his face is in shade, I wouldn't really call it a shadow. I'd still call that a mid-tone. So I'm going to choose mid-tones. And the final little box is how strong do you want the effect to be? It's currently set on 24%. If I do a quick dodge, you can see, there we go, I'm just kind of brightening up his face a bit by about 24%. And that looks to be not bad really, I suppose. You can always undo a dodge or a burn by using your little history palette here. If I go back to open, you can see what I just did and how it had changed the image. You can also just do Ctrl Z if you only want to go back one step. If I wanted the effect to be more, I can just choose a higher percentage. If I go to 76%, that's going to be much too much, as you can see. Let's go back because we don't want that. A more realistic approach would probably be to take that back down here, because you can sort of paint it in to about 18%. I'm actually going to use a slightly smaller brush because the shadow is under his cap. His chin isn't too bad. So let's take the brush size down a bit. And I'm going to make the softness more. Sorry, more softness means less hardness, doesn't it? So let's reduce that so that it fades across more. That brush was too small, a bit bigger. There we go, it's about right. Click up there to get rid of the box and just run it across his eyes. There we go. I don't know if you can see, that's quite subtle, but his eyes are a bit brighter. They're not quite so much in shade. If I wanted more, I'd just paint in some more. Now his face is much brighter. It's probably too bright, but it's also lost contrast. So there'd be another way of doing this. And Photoshop has got all these amazing tools in it, but you need to know what each one does, because you may need to use one tool to complement another, and that's what we're going to do here actually. I want to show you how these things fit together. There isn't one way of doing it. There's no hard and fast rule. Let's just undo what I did. I'm just going to quickly show you a burn tool. If we bring up the burn tool, it's exactly the same, but in the opposite direction. It makes things darker. I'll leave it set on mid-tones because I'm sure you get the idea. 23%, let's just make it much more than that. Let's just go to 100%, so it'll be very dark indeed. If I choose a hard brush like we have here, and I put a line across his face there, you can see that is a very, very deep burn, but it also has a very hard defined edge along it. If I undo it and then choose a soft edge and do the same thing, do you see it's not so harsh, it's fading into the picture. It's kind of going from the center just here and it's fading up the picture. Again, neither of those are very nice, I just did it to show you what I'm talking about. So how would I really go about brightening up this guy's face? Because I don't want to lose contrast in it. And again, there are lots of ways you could do that, but I'm just going to show you the way I would do it using the dodge and burn tools, but I'm going to use them in conjunction with the levels palette. We've already talked about levels, and if you have a look, there's a levels film in the photo editing section in the how to brighten or darken an image. First thing I'll do is go and get image, adjust, levels. I can see from the histogram that I can take the highlights off to the left a bit and that will certainly brighten him up. So let's do it. Here we go. I'd say his face is much nicer there. If I flick between before and after, I can see there's a shadow on his face, but I've got much more detail. I can see his eyes, I can see the way he's looking at me. But this is affecting the entire image. Everything in the image is getting brighter in ratio to it. Look at his hand just here. When I apply those levels, the detail on his hand completely burns away because it's got lots of sunlight on it, lots of highlight. Well, I obviously don't want to do that, do I? Let's just cancel the levels and I'll show you how you can use the burn tool to get around that. Let's choose the burn tool. That brush is probably a little too big for his hand, so I'm going to right click and decrease the brush size a little. That's probably better. I want a fairly defined edge. I'm going to go to about, I don't know, 50%, I suppose. That's my brush size. How much exposure do I want? Well, it's currently on 100%. That's way too much, isn't it? That's just going to make it go black. Look at that. Control Z and stop it. Let's drop that down. It's always better to build these things up a little at a time. I'm going to take this all the way back to about 19% and then just sort of work his hand like this because I don't want it to go berserk. I'm just quietly clicking in a little bit more exposure on his hand there. You can zoom in because I want to make sure I get his fingernails and all his little bits and pieces. Now if I go back to my brush tool, you can see the brush tool is probably a little large, so I'm going to choose a slightly smaller brush and possibly harden the edges slightly, a bit smaller still. Here we go, there's a highlight there. I just want to work on that little highlight and that fingernail and just make sure that's too much. Undo that. You get my drift. There's a little highlight down that side of his finger which I just wanted to darken a bit there. You can take a bit more care over it than I am, but there we go. I have darkened his hand down. Now when I go to my image, adjust, levels, and bring the levels up to get his face, look, I'm getting his face, but I've still got detail in his hand. So there's a great benefit straight away for being able to selectively darken an area of the picture to kind of make sure you don't burn out some highlights. Let's save that because that's pretty good. The caravan there behind his shoulder is a bit white and it's a bit bright. I might want to darken that. So let's bring in our brush size, hardness, bit harder I think than it was, 19%. I'm going to take that up a little more. We're going to choose highlights, even though it's almost a mid-tone. I'm just going to use the highlight tool on the highlight setting. That's probably much too much. Let's undo it. Go back into the history palette, undo what I did. You see how easy this is to adjust things. Sorry, I clicked on the wrong thing. 26%. I want to take that way down to about 13. That's better. Now I can just carefully do that, and that's just kind of, there we go, taken the caravan down a bit. Now that is a little bit obvious. I have overdone it, but I'm not going to fiddle and twiddle with it. I would also probably get in a bit closer and carefully work around his shoulder so he doesn't have quite so much of a halo. But nonetheless, I've made the caravan much less noticeable. Finally, let's have a look at something I could do with the dodge tool to this image. I'm looking at your man's eyes. If I get the zoom in, and let's get in close to his eyes, he's got these little sparkly highlights. Let's go a bit closer still so you can really see. You see these little highlights reflected on his eyes? That's coming from the water or whatever it is in front of him. Those are little sparkles. Those are what makes up people's eyes twinkly. Now I'm not saying there's anything wrong with his eyes the way they are. They're fine. But this is a very subtle little thing which we as human beings will notice. It kind of makes us, people with twinkly eyes, we're always drawn to them. So I'm going to give this man slightly twinklier eyes. And to do it, I'm going to use the dodge tool. Now that brush is obviously much too big. So first off, choose the size. I want a brush size which is pretty much going to go over this little tiny highlight in his eye. I'll zoom in a bit more in a moment. Hardness, I'm set on 29%. That's probably okay because I want it to fade into his eye. I don't want it to be, you know, a harsh line in his eye. I'm going to reduce it slightly, 24. Let's go to 20 odd. There we go. I've got my brush size. I'm just going to zoom in on his eye again so that you can really see what I'm playing about with here. Dodge tool. That just about sort of fits over there. In fact, in looking at it bigger, it's too big. Let's make my brush smaller. There we go. Now I'm just going to do one swipe across that highlight. In fact, I'm going to do two. because I've reduced the power quite a lot, I think that's enough. And if I swap between the two, if you can see a very subtle little difference in that highlight, I'm going to do one more pass on it. There we go. That's 3 passes. That has made the highlight in his eye quite a bit sparklier, but it isn't something which is going berserk. You need to be subtle with things. Now we're going to do exactly the same to the other eye. And I think I need the highlight's a slightly different shape, so I'm going to use a very, very marginally bigger brush. There it is. 3 passes, wasn't it? 1, 2, 3. There we go. Let's just take this out a little so you can see both of his eyes. If I go back to, there we go, watch those little highlights in his eyes now. That's probably overdone, to be honest with you. But again, I'm really doing this just to demonstrate ways you could use these. Let's go to full screen. If I go back to here, look at his eyes. I've gone too far. Here we go. See how his eyes, they twinkle more like that. That's too much. That doesn't look natural. I overdid it. I should have stopped at 2 passes. But again, this is the great thing with Photoshop. You do a bit, you work on it, you look at it and go, too much, doesn't look right. Back off a little. If I wanted to add a vignette to the picture, there are various ways of doing that. But again, dodge and burn is another way. Let's choose a burn tool. I want a large brush size because I'm just going to darken the corners of the picture. That's about right. I want it to be very soft so it fades into the image. I'm going to put this onto mid-tones because these are mostly mid-tones around him. 13%, that's probably, I'm going to go a little more than that. Let's go about 20, 25. Again, there's no rule as to what the percentage is. You do it, it works or it doesn't. If it doesn't, you undo it, choose another one and try again. And as you do it over and over, you'll get experience and start to recognise how much you'll need for yourself. So if I just sort of paint in a bit of darker, a bit more of a vignette around the corners, and these are very subtle. As I do them one at a time, you're possibly not even noticing them. But what oops, I didn't mean to get hold of that. All I'm doing is just darkening in the corners and adding emphasis to our fisherman. If I go back in the history palette, I've filled it up at the moment, but let's go back to there. You see the difference looking around the edges? So there we go, there's our image after I've done a bit of dodging and burning work on it. I'm just going to save it up as a copy. I call that one copy, so we can put the two next to each other. Right, there's the copy. Hang on, I've done something very, very wrong in the file name. Excuse me, I'm working on the other monitor. There we go. Right, now I'm just going to bring in the original so you can look at them next to one another. These are very subtle little bits of polishing. But can you see, this one's just a little bit more lively. It's got a little bit more vibrancy to it than this one has. I'm not saying either is wrong, but these are the things which make images stand out. You're not necessarily going to get an image with that little bit more impact without doing a bit of post-production. When you see these amazing images in IKEA and on photographers' websites, they've almost always had a little bit of polishing work, a bit of work done, you know, just as they would have done before when they were hand printed. The final thing I want to show you, there's 2 final things I want to show you. This little icon on the end here, this set to enable airbrush capabilities. Again, I don't want to go in depth about that because I just want you to understand about dodging and burning for the minute. But you can click on this and then make your brush work more like an airbrush, which means you can paint it in more. Go and have a look in Photoshop, and if you do a little search in the help for airbrush capabilities, that will explain a little bit more about it. It's just a very subtly different style of brush. But for the minute, just get used to selectively working on small areas of the picture and being subtle with it. It's very, very easy to overdo things. I certainly did when I first started playing about with Photoshop. I was always overdoing things. It's about being subtle. When you add up those little subtleties together, you don't notice them on their own, but you do notice them as a whole, such as looking at those 2 images there. The final thing which I was going to show you, and I haven't yet, is the sponge. If we go back into here and choose the sponge tool, It's exactly the same, there are presets and brush sizes and all the rest of it, but this works with colour. Notice how our little box here has gone from shadows, highlights and midtones to desaturate and saturate. So this is a way you could selectively change the colour saturation of an area of a picture, and you could again adjust how much you want that to happen. I'm going to leave that on 100% because I'm only going to show you the effect. It's not something I want to do. I've told it to desaturate by 100%, and if I just start painting on your man's hand here, notice how I'm dropping this into black and white. I'm turning his arm black and white with each brush stroke. Now I don't really want to do that, but you can see the effect. So that is one way you could desaturate the colour of a particular area. If you had a colour print and you wanted to make a bit of it black and white, or part of it you thought, well, I don't know, it's a bit too leery. Maybe you'd boosted the saturation for the overall thing, but one area then looked too much. You could do exactly the same as I just did with the levels palette. You could desaturate it a bit before you upped the saturation of the rest of the picture. I hope that's making sense. Let's get rid of our sponge tool effect because that's not very nice at all. You can also use it to saturate if you want to boost the colour of an area. Again, if I paint that over his hand, you can see it's going a horrible orange colour because I've got it set to flat out. But that's what the sponge tool does, and it works in exactly the same way as the dodge and burn tools. So there you have it, dodge and burn. That's one way to start selectively working on specific little areas of your image to give them a polish, little tiny bit at a time. Get your dodge and burn tools out and go and have a play with it. According to which version of Photoshop you've got, as I think I've probably said, it will give you different options. Play with those options. It's in the playing with and the experimenting with that you'll start to learn how to use them to really add some oomph into some images.